Hello chess students and welcome to my first video. My name is Shaman Stanley and I am a 2200 rated player. I'm going to be playing some games and analyzing them, and hopefully you will be able to learn something from it. Alright, so we got our first game of the year and I am facing a FIDE master from Switzerland. So I typically play the Sicilian. And I guess we'll just see what our opponent plays. There's a few options for white here. He can either play the open Sicilian with knight f3 and d4, or he can play the closed Sicilian, which is knight c3, and instead of playing for this d4 push, he's going to play for d3, f4, and he will choose to either scatter the bishop or put it on the square on the queen side. Since he played knight c3, I think it'd be the easiest to just play g6. And I'm just going to fianchetto my bishop early. I'm not really worried about knight f3 and then d4, which would transpose back to the open Sicilian, because in that case, white would no longer have the Meraxi bind, which is considered to be the best way to defeat the dragon. So here I'm just going to go bishop g7 and keep it simple. Alright, bishop d2. Looks like our opponent might want to go for some kind of queenside castle. We'll just keep it simple and go knight c6. Now here I'm expecting knight f3. Right now I have the potential to go knight d4 and control the center. And knight f3 would stop this plan, although I might even go knight f3 anyways, or knight d4 anyways in that case. Because after knight f3, knight d4, you can just recapture, but I get my bishop in the center. So that is one option, but he chose to go f4. And now I suppose I should play for the d5 break. Now that white's committed his f-pawn, he's sort of indicating that he's going to play on the king side and play something like knight f3 and start some kind of king side attack. He can still choose to fianchetto and castle, but even after that, he will still king side attack. And so the most logical plan when we're facing some kind of flank attack is to strike in the center, which is why I came to the conclusion of e6 and then for a quick d5 break. Now, I'm not really worried about e5. This sort of just creates more holes in white's position. It gives me this d5 square. He just goes knight f3. Now I can play d5 now, or I can play knight g7 first. Now if I go d5 immediately, I'm expecting takes, queen e2 check, knight g7. I do have the full center here. You can just long castle, or short castle. I think I'm doing very good in this position. Compare that to knight g7. It's not really threatening any b4 push. Again, e5 sort of just creates more weaknesses. Leaves me this f5 square too. So I don't really see a difference in doing it. I suppose he also doesn't have to capture in the center. In which case I probably will have my knight on e7 anyways. So I think maybe it'd be best to keep it a bit more flexible. Go knight g7, and then I can play d5 in the next turn. I might even castle first. Okay, goes bishop e2. Now, one consideration I do have at this moment is knight d4. The point is, after knight takes, bishop takes, he can no longer castle. And I'm not really worried about knight b5 in that situation because I have bishop takes b2, rook b1, and just bishop g7, and I have a clean pawn. Although, I am missing something. So, after taking on d4, knight b5, if I take on b2, does knight d6 check. Now I have to move my king, and I lose castling rights. And then he gets rook b1, bishop g7, and then e5, and it's very annoying to get this knight out of that square. So perhaps it's a bit wiser to wait on knight b4, just so I don't run into any knight b5. So then what should I do? Well, I have two options. I could either castle or I could play d5 now, or I could go d6. So that way, I threaten knight b4. Although I think after d6, he will just castle. Now knight d4 kind of loses its power. You still go knight d4. And if knight takes, bishop takes, king h1. I feel like I would much rather just have this d5 break and open the center. Because with this, when the center opens up, I'm going to have central control, and it's going to favor me a lot more. Could also just castle and keep it safe. I don't really think there's anything wrong with either option. I'm just going to play d5. Expecting castle, and then we'll have to consider if I want to push d4 or not. Another thing I might see is e5, with just trying to avoid the exchange. I will need to be careful to not play d4 in that situation, because then he gets knight e4, and it's looking to put a lot of pressure on my dark squares, and that would be a terrible mistake. Okay, but he just castles. I think I'm just going to keep it simple and castle myself. And now we're sort of entering middle game territory. We need to figure out how to outplay my opponent. There are a few things I see in this position. First of all, he is stronger on the king side. If you notice, all of white's pieces are sort of pointed towards the king side. And if I make any push on the king side like f5, it really just weakens my own king and doesn't really accomplish anything. And that's sort of how I can determine that white is stronger on the king side. And because of that, I will probably not be doing a lot of play on the king side. Instead, I'll be trying to do plans on the queen side, where if you see my pawn chain, I control a lot more space on the queen side. My pieces are a lot more mobile on the queen side. I have a bishop facing the queen side, and I also have a knight ready to jump in. Now, knight g5. Slightly trying to find some kind of weakness in my position here. Problem is, he doesn't really have a whole lot. I don't need to play h6 yet. One plan he might have is queen e1 and queen h4, going for some kind of checkmate. But once he plays queen h4, I can play h6 there. Now he sort of wasted a lot of time for that threat. Could also be playing for f5, but in that case, I can just take on f5 and be fine. It is important to note that a lot of times in these fianchetto positions, when you see f5, you can also take with the g-pawn, and after g takes, e takes, and knight takes, my king is perfectly safe. This bishop kind of serves as a big pawn, so there's really no dark square weaknesses. But of course, e takes is also an option. I don't need to discard that. think one idea I'm considering is just playing a6, b5, grab more space on the queen side. Then later on I can play b4, and then I can also develop my bishop. It also stops any knight b5 and knight d6. For example, if you like play d5, I don't want white coming to this d6 square. So I think a6 is a pretty reasonable move. And one thing to note here, I'm not quite calculating a whole lot in these positions. It's more about just establishing ideas for my opponent and for myself, and just considering all of them and then coming up with the best plan. Later on in the position, it might get more tactical, in which case I would actually have to calculate calculate hard lines that are very precise. One idea here for my opponent is a4, with the idea of just stopping this b5 push. But I think in that case, I can go rook b8, something like a4, rook b8, a5, and we see it on the board. I think I can still get that b5 push. So let's consider it. If I go rook b8, he gets a5, and if I go b5 en passant, queen takes, there is quite a lot of pressure on this b pawn. So yeah, I quite like that idea to just go rook b8. And if he doesn't play a5, then I will just get b5 and I will take with the pawn, which I think is much better for me, because then I can play for b4 and put more pressure on this b pawn. Second idea I have in this position is to go knight d4, and now I can trade off one of his bishops, which I think is maybe a move I should have considered previously. I still like rook b8. If he goes a5, I can consider knight d4 here. Oh, I also just realized that a5 gains a pawn. I can just play knight takes, although it does get complicated after knight takes d5. And now e takes, bishop takes a5, which hits my queen, and I would have to move my queen, and gets a little messy. Maybe b6, bishop d2, and maybe I'm fine after just bishop takes b2. I'll have to calculate that line if he plays a5. What's another move he could play? Hmm. He could try queen c1 with the idea of just protecting this b pawn. Although it seems a bit passive, I can just go b5 and continue as normal. Okay, here's rook b1. Kind of the same idea of queen c1. It sort of just abandons this a4 plan entirely. Now I'm actually tempted to go knight d4 while I have the chance. If I go b5 immediately, he can just take it, and I guess it is sort of strong. Maybe bishop f3, and he gets knight e2 in time. Which is why I'm sort of inclined to go knight d4 first. That way I can just trade off this bishop. Yeah, let's go knight d4 here. Now I can play b5 at a later point. It also opens up my light squared bishop, so I might go bishop d7 and just put pressure on this pawn. One idea he might play is b3 here, just sort of to get everything off of this diagonal. But I think I'm quite strong in that case. I can go b5, a takes, and his dark squares are quite weak there. I can later play b4 and start controlling this a file. Alright, we see bishop g4. My opponent's just trying to avoid that bishop trade, or the knight for bishop trade, which is fine by me. I think now I can go b5, and I think my knight in the center is very strong here. b5, a takes, knight e2, and then I go b4. And this c pawn is it's turning a bit backwards, and if he takes on d4, I can always take with check. I think I have a very pleasant position here. So yeah, let's just go b5. You do have to worry about something like e takes, and bishop takes c8. But it's fine for now, I can just play queen takes. And that doesn't really help him at all. Really just makes a weakness on f5. Now, I did consider going for this h5 push. The problem is, after bishop takes, gh, queen takes, there's a lot of mate threats here. I don't actually see a way to defend it. There was also f5 here. I'm not sure why I didn't consider it as much. It is, I think, a little bit stronger. So I guess I should consider it now. If f5, well, we can't really do anything with his bishop. If he goes bishop h3, then I think I'm just quite happy there. I can go knight c6 and keep my knight in the center. If f5, well, we can't play knight takes because bishop takes comes with check, and then he loses his bishop. f5, bishop f3, then I think I take in the center, and then maybe bishop b7, and I have quite a lot of pressure on e4. Though he might play e5 in that case. Let's see, maybe f5, bishop f3, knight takes, and then I can just win a pawn actually. So he would have to play rook takes, but then I can go h6, knight h3, and then take. So I'm winning a pawn, I open the center up, and I think my pieces are a lot more active, so altogether I think I'm just doing very well in that position. Again, if f5, bishop h3, you just go knight c6, and I'm still solid. Not really worried about e5. Yeah, I can just play knight takes, queen takes, and then put a new knight in the center. So yeah, I think I'm just gonna go f5 here. Now I do need to pick up the time a little bit. I am down to 3 minutes. I think he will go back to bishop f3. I think that's the most natural to kind of accept your mistake that and just trade off the bishop. He still has quite a lot of attacking potential. Okay, and e takes. We just play f takes. I didn't really consider this since I just have more control of the center now. Right, bishop f3. Actually inclined to go knight c6 now. I don't really want to allow this knight to go back to f3, and then maybe even to e5, if I can draw a line. So I think just knight c6 for now. I also don't want to give up this very nice knight in the center. I also have this e-file to work with. So yeah, I'm going to go knight takes. If queen h4, I think I just go rook e8, queen h. And if he goes for like queen h4, I go h6. And I think I'm completely fine there. Alright, he's taking out my knight. So I will take on f3 as planned. Now I have the bishop pair. So now it favors me a lot to keep the board kind of open. Right, he goes knight e5. I need to make sure he doesn't control this e5 square. So one idea I have in mind is to go rook e8, rook e1, then bishop b7. Now with knight e5, he does get his knight in the center, but I can go I can go d4, queen d5, and put pressure on both the e5 knight and put pressure on g2. So yeah, I think that's what I'm going to do. I do need to speed up a little bit since I'm down to 2 minutes now. One thing I did not consider is after rook e1, bishop e7, he could take on e5, queen takes, and then queen e1. That case, I think I'd just go queen d7. So, alright, but he goes queen c2. Let's go, yeah, let's go d5. I don't want him pushing, oh, sorry, let's go d4. I don't want him pushing d4 himself, since that closes up the position and gives him this e5 square. So I will just go d4 myself and stop him from getting that square. Do need to be a bit worried about checks on this diagonal, but it's not really a worry right now. And if c takes, I think maybe I just go bishop takes. Give it the bishop pair, but I get an active queen, and this pawn is backwards. I can later go like bishop e6, bishop b5, and I think I have a very pleasant position. It does give him, it does put the position opposite colored bishops, but I think with all the major pieces on the board, there would be a lot of attacking chances. So I'm not really worried about that. Alright, I can win a pawn now, but it does give him some activity. But I don't really think I have a choice here. The dart squares are a bit weak. I would much rather have a pawn on... Oh, and I blundered. Alright, so now that I've blundered exchange, I need to figure out how to how to deal with this the best way. Now, which rook should I... Oh, I suppose I have to give up this rook, because if I move it, then I lose b8. So maybe I should just go queen d5. And after bishop takes, queen takes, he gets the open file, but I'm still fighting. So yeah, let's go queen d5 for now. Fortunately, I do have a space advantage and an extra pawn, so it's not completely lost for me yet. I also have this potential to go bishop b7 and put more pressure on g2. So this game is far from over. Now he doesn't have to take on e5 yet. These rooks are still pinned together. Although he can't play a move like rook e1, because then I take. I think the most logical is to just take and then grab the center for him. And then he just needs to make sure he doesn't hang g2 mate. Alright, but he chooses to take. Alright, now if queen takes, queen f2. That's a bit problematic, so I suppose I will take with this pawn. Although I could just take and then go queen f2. Let's go c takes. I think there's going to be too much pressure on the c pawn. He takes the rook. I'm going to go queen e5. I don't really have a choice there. I'm expecting just rook e1 and queen d5. Does have queen c7, which I missed. And I think that will be GG, because after queen c7, I do have bishop b7, which creates a mate threat, but this rook hangs with check. And after I move the king, he can just defend g2. So queen c7 is just a knockout punch, really. He also has rook e8, threatened too. Alright, but he played queen e2, sort of looking for an exchange on e6. And he's also trying to get some kind of mating attack. I could go bishop d7, queen e7, and bishop c6, but then he just trades. So I suppose I don't really have a choice. I'm just going to go bishop b7 and let him trade on e6. Of course, I don't want to take the queen because after rook takes, his rook gets active. I would much rather get my bishop in the center. And now this is pretty much losing at this point. I'm expecting rook e5. Alright, I see rook e7. Let's just go king f6. We are losing this f-pawn, but I'm hoping to get activity with rook c8, rook c2. Alright, and he's attacking my bishop. I'm just gonna go, yeah, I think I'm just gonna go king e6, defend my bishop. He can still have this h-pawn if he wants it. And this does step into a check. I'm not worried about that. Let's go king f6. Now, if I see rook d7 again, I think I'm just gonna go bishop a8. And I give up d4, but I get rook c2, and I think I'm not winning. I'm still losing, but I have some play left. Now, of course, after rook e7, I don't want to go bishop c6 because that blocks my rook. And I don't want to go bishop e7 because it hangs my bishop. So let's just go, well, I don't have to play bishop a8. I'm going to play rook c2 now. He's going to go rook e2. But no progress is fine by me because I can just go back to, let's go back to c7, and he has to figure out another way to make progress. Probably going to go king f2 now, so he can centralize his king. I'm just going to go b5, or b4, b3. Maybe try to isolate this b2 weakness, and maybe this pawn can be enough to draw the game. Is this not increment? Oh, this is a 15-minute game. I thought it was 15-10. So I suppose I'm just going to lose on time. Alright, let's go b3. It also gives me a chance to flag him. Let's go king g5. Alright, let's go king h5, so I don't hang this g6 pawn. I'm going to lose on time, which is a bit unfortunate. Alright, let's check him. I actually have rook c2 here. Let's take. And let's go here. I'm going to win this piece. Let's go check. B-move. B-move. And I win on time. What a game. That was an intense game. I didn't realize there was no increment, but look at this. 0.1 seconds. Alright, so we see e4, c5, and knight c3, and this indicates the close Sicilian. Now, what I was talking about with g6 is I'm not really worried about the open Sicilian anymore. If he tries to play the open Sicilian now, I think I'm perfectly fine here. He no longer has this c4 move, which tends to be problematic. And let me just show you an example of that. So if he starts out with knight f3, and now if I go g6, d4, takes, bishop g7, and c4, now these two pawns will just be a very big nuisance to deal with. I can go knight c6, let's just say like bishop e3, and like I finished developing, knight f3 castle, bishop e2, d6, castle. Now I have to play, white has this big center and I have to play around it. But I can't really break out of this really. Queen b6 just runs into a bunch of discoveries with like knight e6 or knight f5. And I can't really play a6 b5 because it's defended by so many pieces. And because of that, my queen side's really restricted. Not to mention I don't really have play on the king side. but white does. So he can just quickly play something like f4, go for a quick f5, and I'm going to have a very hard time playing. So that is sort of why when I see knight c3, he no longer has the c4 move. So I don't really mind going g6 and feeding cutting my bishop. So d3, and this signal, once I see d3 or f4, it basically signals that he's going to play the closed Sicilian. He's not going to play for this d4 break. So I should just finish development and then play for e6, d5. f4 and now e6. When your opponent strikes on the side, it's best to strike in the center. It's the most principled way to defeat flank attacks. Now, one move I think I should have considered is knight d4 here, just to get rid of this bishop. And of course, now bishop g4 doesn't really do a whole lot. Now I guess what should I play here? I'm thinking about this f5 plan again. And basically, after bishop e2, I can just go knight c6. Same idea in the game. I can choose when I want to trade off this bishop, and I have full control over the center. Go something like e5. I do need to be a bit careful. I might see that this knight is defended by a pawn and try to go knight takes, f takes, and queen takes. Problem is, there's also a bishop on d2, so I lose my queen instead. So you still need to be a bit careful here. Here I would probably just go something simple like a6, b5, or I don't know, something like bishop b7, maybe queen c7. Just slowly improve the position. I do have to worry about this e6 pawn, but I don't think it's that problematic considering I have all this queenside play, while white does not. But I also think a6 is a pretty reasonable move here. a4, and again, knight d4 I think is a good move. But I also like rook b8. And yeah, so a5 is a bit complex here. I, I don't think I can take the pawn. I think after knight takes, white is doing fine. Because now I lose this. I have to do something, let's say like bishop d4, king h1, b6, bishop d2. I do win this pawn, but I don't know, it feels a bit iffy. But the engine says it's fine. It's giving me -2 right now, or minus 0.2. So yeah, this was an option. I also had b5 here. Just a takes, queen takes. And I think I would have went for this variation. I don't have an extra pawn, but I think black's play is a lot more simpler. I'm just going to keep pressure on this b pawn. And I also have this a pawn, which might become a pass pawn if I ever win this b2 pawn. So I think black's position is a lot more in trouble here than in if I take on a5. I rook b1. I don't think this was a good move. I really don't think you should be avoiding a5 here. Or one move I was considering was queen c1. And part of the idea is I get this bishop d1 move. Now you don't have to trade off the bishop. And you also keep this b2 pawn protected. I think black is in the driver's seat here. Definitely something simple like b5 will put white in a very tough position. But I don't think this is something white should be afraid of. I think the bishops are more than enough to equalize something like c3 here and knight c6. And white is doing fine. He's a bit cramped, but I think he's doing fine. And now bishop g4 I think was kind of the beginning of the end for white. Of course, I did end up blundering the exchange, but bishop g4 was not a good move. I think f5 does well, bishop b2, and I think I would just put my knight in the center again. And this is sort of the same recurrent theme after knight d4, where we get this f5 position. But I went b5 here, which is, I think is sort of a mistake because it misses the chance to go f5. But it's not a terrible move by any means. It still continues my goal in the position to put pressure on b2 and knight e2. And now this is definitely a mistake because now there's no bishop e2 for him. So now he just gets stuck with a much worse position. He went, if he goes like bishop f3, I believe I said knight takes, and then either d takes or f takes. It doesn't matter. Like takes, fe4. And now this knight gets kicked out, so probably knight e5 to keep it in the center. But I think I'm just doing very fine here. I have two extra pawns. I also have this d5 square, so something like knight d5, e3 could be very annoying, or similarly knight f5 and then e3. I can also exchange this knight on e5 if it ever becomes too annoying. Alright, but he plays e takes, which I think is pretty reasonable, but it also gives me this open e file to work with too. Bishop f3, knight c6. And maybe this was inaccurate, because it did allow knight takes, and then after knight takes, he does get c3, which I didn't really see. But now he gets this d4 push, and it's a bit unpleasant. So perhaps it was better to do something else. What should I do here? I could take on a4. I don't think that's a good move, because I think my a pawn just becomes weak. I do, of course, put pressure on this b pawn, but I'm not sure about that position. Another option is to just improve my position slowly, something like bishop b7, knight takes, bishop takes, king h1. Though and I have to defend against knight e6, so I have to do something like queen d6. But I feel like this might be a bit dubious too, since white's not really put under any pressure without a knight on d4. I need a knight on d4 and not a bishop. Bishops aren't really good on outposts. They're much better in the back of the board. We much rather have a knight in the center with something like knight c6, knight d4. So that's not good. The other move is just maybe h6. It does weaken my king a little bit, but he has to go knight h3. Now this knight is very passive. Now, let's just trade off rook takes and maybe knight c6. I'm getting back to this d4 square. Put a lot of pressure on white's position. This knight's never really going to get back into the game. Same with this rook. It's not really doing a whole lot on f3. Rook g3, I always have king h7. There's not really any pressure on that side of the board. And I can always play something like d5, rook e8, bishop b7, and I can just slowly improve my position. So yeah, I think h6 is maybe the correct move here. But yeah, I allowed c3, took on f3, and now d4, or I played rook e8. Maybe d4 here was more important, just so I don't run into problems after taking and then blundering bishop f4. This way I can just place my queen in the center. And now it sort of just becomes a fight over this e5 pawn. White really needs to hold on to it, but it's going to have a hard time doing that. I can play something like bishop b7 and then move my rook to e8 and just As long as I don't blunder any pin on with bishop f4, I think I'm just doing much better here. So I think d4 is much better. One move to consider is queen b3 check, but maybe just c4, dc4, and then there's a pin on this file. I do lose this d pawn though. But I threatened bishop c4, so T just tries to win his pawn back. He ends up losing an exchange. So I don't think queen b3 is a very strong move here. It sort of just runs into tactical problems. So yeah, I think white's position is a lot worse here. Maybe rook e1. Then I get bishop e7. Now knight e5, queen d5. And sort of the counterplay I was hoping for actually comes to life in this variation, where now I have pressure on g2. It's very difficult for white to deal with all these problems. And then I think queen c2 is a bit slow. Maybe just rook e1 here. This was kind of a second problem with going rook e8. Because now if I go bishop b7, he can just exchange this rook off and then go queen e1. And I suppose he is losing this b pawn. So it's maybe black is doing actually pretty good here. But it seems a bit iffy to allow all of this. A move like knight e5 looks quite strong for white. Which I think this option might be a bit better than just queen c2. But queen c2 does make sense. He'd want to maybe connect his rooks, push for d5. So I don't think queen c2 is too weird of a move. d4, a takes, knight e5. Here I really should just go queen d5, bishop e7. I rushed a bit with just taking the pawn. I didn't actually consider white's move after that. So I think in hindsight, just queen d5, bishop e7, get my rook off of b8 first, and then I can take on e5, and I think I'm doing much better there. So yeah, and now I had blundered an exchange, but it's important to not resign in these positions. People who know me in person actually know that I'm very good with not resigning and winning games, because I am losing an exchange. That's not the end of the world. There's plenty of opportunity to make a mistake. And I thought this game was a 15-minute plus 10 increment. There's no increment in this game, so that gives even more reason to not resign. Because like we saw in this game, white can flag and lose on time. So just make a best of your worst positions. Just queen d5. I didn't really have another option. I could do something like queen e7, but I see no reason to not put the queen on d5. It's a much more active square. Of course, I can't move the rook because b8 hangs, so that's no good. So queen d5 and keep it simple. And of course, like I said in the game, white shouldn't play rook e8. This would be a terrible blunder because now I can just take his rook. And even though this rook on b8 is attacked, I'm also attacking his own rooks. So, in fact, bishop takes b8, king takes. I think I'm just doing better here. Something maybe simple like bishop e7, and I have a lot of pressure on white's position. Takes, c takes, now takes, and here white did have a knockout punch, queen c7, and he attacks my rook, and he also threatens checkmate. And there's no way to escape this. If I do something like bishop e7, threatening mate, like I said, queen takes b8 is check, so that's no good. And if I could just do something simple like rook a8, a blunder checkmate. So queen c7 is a knockout punch that my opponent missed. Instead, he went queen e2, and this is still quite strong, because now he threatens queen e8, and he also has ideas like queen e6 check. So I just decided to go bishop e7 since I was low on time. Bishop d7 was in my consideration. The reason why I didn't play is because I was a bit worried about queen e2. Although I realize now it's not quite a worry, because I have rook e8, queen b4, and then rook, I guess maybe rook c6 or rook c8 or maybe rook e3. Now it kind of gets into a tough position here. He has to get this rook out of the center and then win by his material advantage. Rook e3 is a bit of an annoying move because after rook takes, d takes, it's sort of hard to deal with this passed pawn. Something simple like rook e1, bishop c6. Suddenly, it's not so clear if you're winning anymore. Queen takes d3. I think maybe even uh, black is better here. So you definitely don't want to allow that. So maybe queen e7 wasn't in danger, but I think queen e5 is also strong here, which just forces a queen trade because of this rook hanging. I can't go queen b7 because now queen d6, rook d6, or rook e7, and just pressure on this d7 piece. So yeah, I think bishop e7 is a pretty practical decision too. So now queen e6, king g7. I give up my queen, but I also have some activity in the endgame. So rook e7, king f6, rook d7. Now um, I didn't want to go bishop a8 here because I just lose this d5 pawn, and it takes some time to go rook c8 and then rook c2. So I figured here I should just go king e6, rook takes h7, and now my rook is a bit more active at the cost of a pawn. And also, allowing the rook to come to the e file is not a worry. Really, it might be better on f2, so that way it has rook f2. On e1, it didn't have rook e1, although he did have rook e7, rook e2. So, I don't really think it matters. Rook e7, rook c2. And now he's sort of just getting his king safe. He wants to go like king h2. So I just go b4. The idea is to get this pawn on b3 where it's protected by the bishop. Then if I go rook c2, I can maybe even win this b2 pawn, and I might be able to draw the game. So b4, rook a1, b3, check, king g5. Now he played h4 check, and this is sort of an important moment. King takes h4 allows a lot of counterplay. He can go rook takes g6, and now his rooks are in my position. He can go something like rook e8, rook h8, and end the game very quickly. So I kind of made a practical decision to just go king h5, not allow him to get counterplay. And I, of course, always have this g4 square if I need it. So rook d6. So a very important moment here is rook c2, and now you can't stop you can't take rook takes c2, because now you can't stop promotion. You can't play rook c6 to stop the promotion. Can't go rook a1 previously, so this would be a game-losing mistake. And let's see, what did he play in the game? He just played rook e8. He was trying to go for counterplay here. And I think this was the best move, because now this bishop's also hanging. And if I just do a simple move like bishop f3, I can go rook h8, king g4, takes g6, and this g2 pawn is defended. So rook e8 is a strong move. And he really just needed to find this critical move, king h3. Because now I don't have any checks left in the position, and he threatens rook h8 checkmate, and my bishop is hanging. And this would be game over. But unfortunately for him, he went rook h or he went king h1, and he probably thought that he could take the bishop if I gave it discovery check. Problem is, I have rook e2 check, and this rook hangs too. And now I have a winning endgame, and this was sort of a time scramble at this point. He had 3.7 seconds. I had zero point 0.3 seconds. It's basically just pre-moves at this point. So king f1. Then I played rook e1 to take down his time. I'm not really worried about my pieces. This game's not going to end because you played the best position or you played the best game. You're going to win on time. And so I just played rook e1 check to kind of throw him off, stop any pre-moves he had. He probably pre-moved rook takes d5. But because of rook d1 check, he had to spend time to go king f2. Now just bishop e4. I was just making a move, and I won on time with 0.1 seconds. He had played any move in that position, he would have won the game. I wouldn't have had time to pre-move. So yeah, that's a very nice game. Quite a nice game for first game of the year against the FIDE Master. Quite happy with the results, and I hope you could learn something from this. Alright, I'll see you later, I guess.